Picture this: a vast, sun-baked plain stretching endlessly under a sky heavy with history. Beneath your feet, the remnants of a civilization long gone. Its streets once bustling with life, its walls echoing with voices lost to time. Who were the brilliant minds who first dreamed of cities? What drove them to transform scattered villages into sprawling, organized metropolises? The story of humanity's first cities isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's a tale of ambition, innovation, and the relentless human spirit to build something greater than ourselves. Thousands of years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary happened. People came together, not just as families or tribes, but as communities on a scale never seen before. They built towering ziggurats that scraped the heavens, designed intricate systems to tame the rivers, and created laws to govern thousands of lives. This wasn't just survival, it was the birth of civilization as we know it. But why here? Why then? What sparked this revolutionary leap from small villages to the world's first cities? The answers lie buried in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and other cradles of urban life waiting to be uncovered. This journey isn't just about dates and ruins, it's about the people. The visionaries who looked at a blank horizon and saw a city. The problem solvers who figured out how to feed thousands, govern fairly, and defend their homes. The artists, the traders, the leaders who turned chaos into order. As we explore these ancient urban wonders, we'll uncover the why behind their creation. Was it for power, for safety, or something deeper? And we'll meet the who, the forgotten architects of our modern world. So come along, let's step into the past together and discover the incredible story of how humanity first built its cities, and in doing so, built the future. What makes a city different from a village? It's not just about size, it's about how people lived, worked, and dreamed together. Take Çatalhöyük, one of the world's oldest known settlements, where houses stood shoulder to shoulder like a honeycomb, with residents climbing across rooftops instead of walking streets. Or Jericho, with its massive stone walls and tower, built thousands of years before the pyramids. These weren't just clusters of homes, they were experiments in something new. A true city isn't just a big village, it's a place where society transforms, where people specialize in crafts, where leaders emerge to organize, and where shared spaces like temples and marketplaces become the heartbeat of daily life. Think about the difference between a village blacksmith and a city blacksmith. In a village, one person might make tools for their neighbors while also farming. But in a city, that blacksmith could focus entirely on their craft, trading blades for food, cloth, or pottery made by others. This specialization changed everything. It meant more complex economies, new inventions, and the rise of social classes. Cities also demanded something villages rarely needed: rules. With thousands living side by side, someone had to manage disputes, organize construction, and store surplus food for lean times. That's why early cities often left behind not just houses, but law codes, tax records, and even the oldest known customer complaints etched into clay tablets. Monumental architecture is another clue that separates cities from simpler settlements. A village might have a communal granary, but a city builds ziggurats that touch the clouds or stone circles aligned with the stars. These structures weren't just functional, they were declarations of power, faith, and collective identity. They required planners, engineers, and armies of workers, all coordinated under a shared vision. And once built, they drew travelers from distant lands, turning cities into crossroads of ideas where languages, goods, and beliefs mixed in ways that would shape history. Geography played a starring role in this urban revolution. The first cities didn't appear randomly, they rose where the land itself encouraged innovation. Fertile river valleys like Mesopotamia's Tigris and Euphrates or Egypt's Nile provided not just food, but natural highways for trade and communication. Yet even in harsh environments like the arid Indus Valley, people engineered solutions, canals, reservoirs, and grid-planned streets that turned challenges into opportunities. The story of urbanization isn't just about human genius, but about how we learn to dance with our environment, reshaping it while letting it shape us in return. The earliest cities didn't just appear anywhere, they grew where the land itself whispered possibilities. Imagine standing where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet, watching their waters carry rich silt across the floodplains. Here in Mesopotamia, the soil was so fertile that a single farmer could grow enough grain to feed 5 others. That surplus changed everything. No longer did everyone need to work the fields. Some could become potters, weavers, or scribes, trading their skills for food. But it wasn't just about abundance. These river valleys were nature's highways, where goods and ideas flowed as freely as water. A copper merchant from the mountains could meet a grain trader from the plains, sparking exchanges that would ripple across generations. Yet these same life-giving rivers also brought danger. Annual floods could wipe out entire harvests, so early city dwellers became master engineers, digging canals to control the waters. In the Indus Valley, they built entire cities on raised platforms with sophisticated drainage, stone gutters running beneath streets to keep homes dry during monsoons. The Nile, with its predictable floods, taught Egyptians to measure time by the river's rhythm, inventing calendars to track planting seasons. These weren't just survival tactics, they were the first acts of urban planning, turning environmental challenges into opportunities for innovation. Trade routes played an equally vital role. Jericho thrived near natural springs and crossroads where caravans carried obsidian from distant volcanoes. The city of grew wealthy as a port where Mesopotamian merchants traded with sailors from the Persian Gulf. Location dictated purpose. Some cities became religious centers perched on sacred hills, others military strongholds guarding mountain passes. Even today, you can trace ancient urban footprints by following geographic logic. Where fresh water met fertile land and trading paths converged, cities took root. The people behind these proto-metropolises weren't just lucky. They were visionaries who read the landscape like a blueprint. Take the mysterious planners of Mohenjo-Daro, who laid out streets in perfect grids centuries before the Romans. Or the Sumerian priests who turned ziggurats into cosmic bridges between earth and heaven. These early architects didn't fight nature, they partnered with it, aligning walls with star patterns, harvesting wind for ventilation, and positioning temples to catch the first light of dawn. Their cities weren't just places to live, they were living systems as carefully balanced as the ecosystems that sustained them. Who were these first city builders, the visionaries who turned scattered settlements into thriving urban centers? The answer isn't a single name etched in stone, but a chorus of voices across time. In Mesopotamia, kings like Gilgamesh became legends not just for their strength, but for their ability to rally thousands, digging canals that stretched for miles, raising temple towers that dominated skylines. Yet these rulers didn't work alone. Behind every ziggurat stood armies of laborers, scribes tallying brick counts, and priests interpreting divine signs to align each stone with the heavens. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro tell a different but equally fascinating story. Here, no grand palaces or royal tombs dominate. Instead, the city whispers of something radical for its time: equality. Standardized bricks, uniform street grids, and sophisticated public wells suggest planners working for collective benefit rather than individual glory. Was this an early experiment in democracy or simply brilliant pragmatism? Without written records, we piece together clues like detectives: the absence of weapons in homes, the careful placement of every drain and courtyard, all hinting at a society that valued order and shared prosperity. Then there are the unsung specialists, the true backbone of urbanization, the coppersmiths who turned raw ore into tools strong enough to shape stone, the potters whose standardized vessels carried grain to feed growing populations, the surveyors who laid out streets with nothing but ropes and stars to guide them. These weren't just workers, they were innovators solving problems no one had faced before. How do you distribute water to thousands? How do you store food without spoilage? Their solutions, from the world's first plumbing in Crete to giant granaries in Harappa, became the hidden wiring of civilization. Religion played a surprising role in these early urban experiments. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were the original city halls where priests doubled as administrators, tracking harvests and settling disputes. In Sumer, temple complexes stored surplus grain, acting as ancient welfare systems during droughts. The Mayans built pyramids aligned with solstices, turning astronomy into civic planning. Perhaps this blend of sacred and practical explains why so many early cities grew around spiritual sites. Faith provided the glue that bound strangers together in these new, crowded worlds. What's most striking is how these pioneers worked with what they had. No steel, no cement, just sun-baked mud bricks and human ingenuity. When flooding threatened, they elevated entire cities like the Indus Valley's mound builders. When trade routes expanded, they invented writing to track transactions, first as simple pictographs, later as complex scripts. Every challenge spawned innovation, from the first lunar calendars to standard weights and measures. These weren't just city planners, they were humanity's first startup founders, iterating and improving with each generation. The artifacts they left behind, a cuneiform tablet recording a beer recipe, a carefully laid sewer line, a toy cart from a child's grave, tell us something profound. These builders weren't so different from us. They worried about feeding families, debated how to govern fairly, and took pride in creating something lasting. Their cities weren't perfect. Crowding brought disease. Inequality grew with wealth, but they dared to imagine a new way of living. And in doing so, they laid foundations not just of brick and mortar, but of ideas that still shape our world today. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper without cranes or pave a highway without bulldozers. That's exactly what ancient city planners faced, and yet they created structures so sturdy that some still stand after 4,000 years. Take Mesopotamia's ziggurats, those stepped pyramids reaching for the gods. Workers mixed river mud with straw, pressed it into wooden molds, then baked the bricks under the blistering sun. The result, buildings so durable that when archaeologists uncover them today, the bricks still bear the fingerprints of their makers. But here's the real genius: these weren't just piles of mud. Builders waterproofed walls with bitumen, a natural tar that seeped from the ground, creating seals so effective they rival modern materials. Meanwhile, 800 miles east in the Indus Valley, an even more precise system emerged. There, workers mass-produced bricks in standardized sizes, perfect rectangles, with a 4:2:1 ratio, allowing entire cities to rise like Lego sets. Streets crossed at right angles with drains running beneath them, covered by stone slabs you could lift to clear blockages. Some homes even had chutes connecting to these underground sewers, making Mohenjo-Daro's sanitation system more advanced than many European cities 2,000 years later. How did they achieve such precision without laser levels? Archaeologists suspect they used simple but effective tools: weighted strings for straight lines, water-filled trenches to ensure flat foundations. Coordinating these projects required more than technical skill. It demanded an unprecedented social engine. In Egypt, records show workers received beer rations, 3 daily gallons per laborer, as payment for building pyramids. Mesopotamia likely operated a corvée system where citizens contributed labor as a form of tax, but this wasn't just brute force, it was orchestrated teamwork. At the Great Ziggurat of cuneiform tablets list exactly how many bricks each team should produce per day, with supervisors tracking progress. Picture the scene: crews singing rhythmic work songs to synchronize brick passing, scribes tallying supplies, and foremen adjusting plans when unexpected floods delayed clay deliveries. The true marvel lies in how these techniques evolved. Early attempts, like the irregular walls of Jericho's first settlement, gave way to carefully engineered structures within just a few generations. Builders learned through trial and error, adding reinforcements to prevent mud brick erosion, designing sloped streets to channel monsoon rains away from homes. Each city became a living textbook, with knowledge passed down through apprentice systems. A young Sumerian architect might spend years mixing bitumen before being trusted to design a temple's foundation. This gradual accumulation of wisdom turned simple survival into an art form, one that would lay the groundwork for every metropolis that followed. What's most astonishing isn't just what they built, but how they thought. These planners envisioned cities not as static collections of houses, but as interconnected systems. At Çatalhöyük, residents painted murals inside their homes years before the first pyramid rose, suggesting that beauty mattered as much as function. The Minoans of Crete designed palaces with light wells and ventilation shafts to combat summer heat, an ancient form of passive climate control. Every brick, every canal, every street grid reflects a profound shift in human consciousness, the realization that by working together, we could reshape the world itself. And that collective vision, more than any single invention, became the true foundation of urban life. Cities didn't just rise from the earth, they were carefully held together by invisible threads of social order, weaving together farmers, artisans, and rulers into a functioning whole. Picture a Sumerian temple complex buzzing with activity, priests tallying grain stores, potters shaping vessels for trade, and laborers hauling bricks for the next great ziggurat. At the top stood the priest kings, figures who blurred the line between political leaders and divine messengers. They didn't just collect taxes, they performed sacred rituals to ensure floods came on time and harvests were plentiful. Their authority wasn't enforced by soldiers alone, but by a shared belief that disrupting this order might anger the gods themselves. Yet hierarchy wasn't rigid everywhere. In the Indus Valley, archaeologists uncover something surprising: no grand palaces, no evidence of warrior kings. Instead, neighborhoods of craftsmen lived in equal-sized homes, their workshops producing standardized weights and beads with almost industrial precision. Was this a society where skill trumped birthright? Clay seals depicting unicorns and yogic postures hint at shared spiritual practices that may have united merchants from distant regions. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the world's first law codes carved by Hammurabi spelled out consequences for everything from shoddy construction to medical malpractice, proving that urban life demanded new ways to maintain trust among strangers. The glue holding these societies together often came from unexpected places. Take beer, a staple in both Sumerian and Egyptian cities. Brewing required surplus grain, cooperation, and distribution systems, turning taverns into social hubs where farmers, scribes, and laborers mingled. Festivals honoring city gods brought everyone together, from slaves to elites, reinforcing collective identity through parades and feasts. Even death played a role. Elaborate burials for commoners in ancient Chinese cities like Anyang show how ancestor worship created continuity between generations, reminding the living that their actions echoed beyond their lifetime. What's fascinating is how these systems adapted. When drought struck Mesopotamian cities around 2200 BCE, temple records show rations being redistributed to prevent starvation, an early form of crisis management. In Mohenjo-Daro, the lack of weapons in homes suggests conflict resolution through means other than violence, perhaps councils or trade agreements. The Minoans of Crete built their palaces without defensive walls, relying instead on naval prowess and diplomacy to protect their vibrant ports. These weren't static societies, they evolved solutions to the unique pressures of crowded urban living, balancing control with cooperation in ways that still influence how we organize our cities today. Beneath the grandeur of monuments and the bustle of marketplaces flowed an undercurrent of mutual dependency. A scribe depended on the farmer's surplus to eat. The farmer needed the scribe's records to trade, and both relied on the ruler's canals to water their fields. This web of interdependence turned cities into something more than the sum of their parts, living organisms where every role, from brickmaker to high priest, sustained the whole. That delicate balance between individual ambition and collective survival remains the unsung masterpiece of our first urban ancestors. Rising above the flat Mesopotamian plains, the ziggurat wasn't just a building, it was the beating heart of the city. These towering temples doubled as economic powerhouses where priests kept meticulous records of grain stores, labor assignments, and trade agreements on clay tablets. The gods themselves were listed as landowners in official documents, with entire neighborhoods designated as their property. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was a brilliant system that turned faith into infrastructure. When a priest announced that the storm god Enlil demanded a new irrigation canal, farmers showed up not just out of devotion, but because they knew the harvest and their survival depended on it. Compare this to the labyrinthine shrines of Çatalhöyük, where bull horns embedded in walls and vivid murals of leopards suggest a more intimate spirituality. Here, religion seemed woven into daily life rather than towering above it. Families buried ancestors beneath their homes, maintaining a tangible connection to the past. Without grand temples or priestly elites, this city thrived for centuries through shared rituals rather than top-down decrees. The difference couldn't be starker. Where Mesopotamian cities used religion to centralize power, Çatalhöyük's beliefs reinforced community bonds without visible hierarchies. The New Year festival in Babylon reveals how spectacle cemented urban order. For 12 days, the statue of Marduk traveled through the city in a golden procession, with the king humbly grasping the god's hand, a theatrical reminder that even rulers answered to divine authority. Crowds lining the streets weren't just spectators, they participated in sacred dramas reenacting cosmic battles between order and chaos. These weren't just holidays, they were social glue, transforming strangers into neighbors with shared myths and collective purpose. Yet religion's urban influence wasn't always benign. When drought struck, priests might interpret it as divine punishment, justifying harsh measures against supposed sinners. Tax records show temple estates growing wealthier during famines, as desperate farmers traded land for food. The same system that provided stability could also entrench inequality, with elites claiming privileged access to the gods. Even warfare took on sacred dimensions. Conquered cities saw their deities captured and installed in the victors' temples, a spiritual colonization matching military domination. The Indus Valley presents a fascinating counterpoint. At Mohenjo-Daro, the Great Bath's precise geometry suggests ritual importance, but no evidence of priest-kings emerges. Instead, hundreds of identical clay seals depict meditative figures and mythical beasts, hinting at decentralized spiritual practices. Perhaps here, religion served more as a cultural lingua franca for traders than a tool of control, a reminder that urban belief systems could take wildly different forms. From the oracle bones of ancient Chinese cities to the sweat lodges of Cahokia's mound builders, each civilization found unique ways to intertwine the sacred and the civic, proving there was no single blueprint for spiritual urbanism. What unites these diverse experiments is their ingenuity in solving the fundamental challenge of cities: how to make thousands of strangers work together. Whether through awe-inspiring ziggurats or household shrines, early urbanites discovered that shared beliefs could motivate collective action in ways brute force never could. The echoes of their solutions still resonate today in the way modern skyscrapers dwarf neighborhood churches, yet both continue to shape the rhythms of city life. Walk through the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, and you'll notice something strange: no grand temples looming over the city, no towering statues of kings. Instead, the pride of this Indus Valley metropolis was its water supply. Hundreds of wells provided clean drinking water, while covered drains ran beneath every major street, filtering waste away from homes. This wasn't just engineering, it was a philosophy. While Mesopotamian rulers poured resources into ziggurats to impress the gods, Indus planners invested in public health, standardizing brick sizes so precisely that modern archaeologists can't slip a credit card between them. Their obsession with order extended to trade, with uniform stone weights so accurate they varied by less than a gram across the entire civilization. Here, urban excellence meant precision, not pageantry. Now sail down the Nile to Thebes, where the rhythm of life pulsed to a different beat. Egyptian cities existed in the shadow of eternity, their very streets aligned to constellations that guided pharaohs to the afterlife. Workers' villages near pyramid sites reveal meticulous planning: bakeries, hospitals, even a strike recorded when rations were late, but all orbiting the central goal of preparing rulers for immortality. Where Indus engineers obsessed over drainage, Egyptian architects calculated the perfect angle to make a tomb withstand millennia. Their urbanism wasn't about mortal convenience but cosmic harmony, with temples positioned so sunlight pierced inner sanctuaries only on the king's coronation day. Far to the east, China's Urartu culture took yet another path. Beneath the foundations of later dynasties, archaeologists uncover a city built around bronze. Workshops with ceramic molds mass-produced ritual vessels, while a sprawling palace complex hinted at early bureaucracy. Unlike Mesopotamia's temple economies or the Indus Valley's pragmatic equality, Urartu's power flowed from controlling both metal technology and sacred knowledge. Their urban blueprint fused craftsmanship with ceremony, turning bronze cauldrons into symbols that bound distant communities to the city's authority. What's remarkable isn't just their differences, but how each approach worked. The Indus Valley thrived for 700 years without evidence of warfare, their standardized systems creating stability. Egypt's death-focused cities outlasted rivals through sheer cultural cohesion. Mesopotamia's temple states birthed writing and mathematics amid constant competition. There was no universal rulebook, just human creativity adapting urbanization to local needs. A city could be a spiritual machine like Egypt's Abydos, a commercial hub like Dilmun in the Persian Gulf, or even a ceremonial landscape like Cahokia's mounds in North America. This diversity held unexpected advantages. When climate change dried up Indus Valley rivers around 1900 BCE, their hyper-specialized systems may have struggled to adapt. Meanwhile, Mesopotamia's competing city-states fostered innovation through rivalry. If one city's irrigation failed, others could copy solutions from neighbors. The lesson: urbanization wasn't a single invention but a toolkit, with different civilizations mixing elements to suit their environment and values. Just as modern cities today might prioritize green spaces, tech hubs, or historic preservation, these ancient builders proved that the soul of a city isn't in its blueprints, but in how it answers one enduring question: what makes a community worth living in? Trade would become the thread connecting these urban experiments, transforming isolated innovations into a shared vocabulary of civilization. Picture a Mesopotamian merchant unloading copper from Oman at Mohenjo-Daro's docks, or an Egyptian envoy bartering lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. These networks didn't just move goods, they circulated ideas, from the concept of weight standards to new gods worshipped in foreign ports. As we trace these ancient routes, we'll discover how cities speaking different languages and worshipping different gods began weaving the first threads of globalization. Picture a dusty caravan winding through mountain passes, its donkeys laden with blue stones mined from Afghan cliffs. By the time this lapis lazuli reached the workshops of it had passed through countless hands: traders haggling in the bazaars of Harappa, sailors transporting it down the Persian Gulf, artisans transforming it into sacred amulets for Mesopotamian temples. This wasn't just commerce, it was the internet of the ancient world, connecting cities across thousands of miles. At Mohenjo-Daro's docks, archaeologists found seals from distant Dilmun, while Mesopotamian texts mention copper from Magan and cedar from Lebanon. These weren't random exchanges but intricate networks, with standardized weights and contracts etched in clay, ensuring fairness between strangers who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods. The real magic happened in the markets. Walk through the crowded stalls of ancient Ebla, where Sumerian merchants bartered silver for Anatolian tin, a crucial ingredient for bronze, while Hittite musicians played lyres inlaid with shells from the Indus Valley. Here, a simple trade for spices could spark revolutions. Syrian potters adopted the fast wheel from Mesopotamian neighbors, tripling their output. Egyptian doctors acquired new herbal remedies from Nubian traders. Even measurement systems spread, with the Indus Valley's decimal-based weights influencing standards from Crete to Mesopotamia. These marketplaces became the world's first think tanks, where a chance conversation might solve a drainage problem or inspire a new temple design. But trade routes carried more than goods. Alongside bolts of dyed Phoenician cloth traveled something far more powerful: ideas. The concept of city walls likely jumped from Jericho to Mesopotamian settlements. The archetype of the mother goddess appears in variations from Çatalhöyük to Indus Valley seals. Writing systems evolved through cross-pollination. Egyptian hieroglyphs may have been inspired by Mesopotamian cuneiform, while the Phoenician alphabet borrowed elements from both. Even urban nightmares spread this way. Skeletal evidence shows tuberculosis hitchhiking along trade routes, striking down crowded city dwellers from the Nile to the Yellow River. The archives of Ebla reveal just how sophisticated these networks became. Thousands of clay tablets detail exports ranging from olive oil to exotic animals, with precise records of tariffs and diplomatic gifts. One tablet lists 42 different types of textiles, another notes the exact wages paid to translators. This wasn't haphazard barter, it was an early form of globalized commerce, complete with trade disputes. A shipment of substandard tin sparked an international incident, and even embargoes when Mari blocked Ebla's access to Anatolian metals. Such complexity forced cities to develop new tools of governance, from customs officials to treaty systems. Archaeologists still debate whether cities emerged independently or through shared inspiration. The striking similarities between distant urban centers, from grid layouts to stepped pyramids, suggest more than coincidence. Yet each civilization adapted these concepts uniquely. While Mesopotamians built ziggurats for astral gods, the Maya constructed similar pyramids to track Venus cycles. Perhaps the truth lies in between, like musicians in separate lands inventing similar instruments. Early urban planners arrived at parallel solutions to universal challenges: how to organize crowds, store surpluses, and honor the sacred. Beneath the glitter of exchanged treasures flowed darker currents. Competition for resources turned trade routes into battlegrounds, with cities like Mari rising and falling based on who controlled copper mines. The world's first recorded trade war erupted when Sargon of Akkad seized shipping lanes, choking rivals' economies. Environmental degradation followed prosperity. Lebanon's famed cedar forests dwindled from overharvesting, while Mesopotamian soils turned salty from excessive irrigation. These weren't just growing pains, but warnings that urbanization's brilliance cast long shadows. As we peel back these layers, a pattern emerges. Cities didn't just need trade to survive, they redefined what trade could be. A simple exchange of obsidian for grain in 8000 BC Jericho evolved into multinational empires negotiating complex treaties by 2000 BC. The goods changed, the scale expanded, but the essential alchemy remained. Strangers meeting in crowded markets, discovering that cooperation could yield more than conflict. That revelation, more than any monument, became the true inheritance of our urban ancestors, and perhaps their most enduring lesson for our interconnected world. Yet for all their achievements, these early cities faced challenges that no amount of trade could solve. Droughts parched their fields, fires consumed their tightly packed neighborhoods, and the very systems designed to protect them sometimes bred new forms of oppression. The next chapter in humanity's urban story isn't one of unbroken progress, but of resilience, of societies learning that cities, like the people who build them, must constantly adapt or perish. The towering walls of Uruk weren't just architectural marvels, they were desperate solutions to a brutal reality. Scorch marks on ancient bricks and caches of sling stones buried beneath city gates tell silent stories of sieges and raids. In Mesopotamia, where life depended on controlling water, conflicts between city-states like Lagash and Umma erupted over canals, with victory stelae boasting of destroyed dams and diverted rivers. The famous Stele of the Vultures doesn't just show warriors clashing, it depicts prisoners bound in nets, a grim reminder that early urbanization's growth was fertilized by conquest. Yet this violence wasn't mindless destruction. When the Akkadian Empire absorbed defeated cities, they didn't slaughter indiscriminately. They co-opted local elites, standardized weights and measures, and created history's first multicultural urban network. Warfare reshaped cities in unexpected ways. Jericho's stone tower, once thought purely defensive, may have doubled as a flood barrier, showing how threats from both nature and neighbors spurred innovation. The Indus Valley's lack of obvious fortifications puzzled archaeologists until they noticed how entire cities were raised on artificial mounds, turning geography itself into a shield. Defensive needs accelerated social changes too. Sumerian kings gained permanent powers during wartime that never fully receded, transforming temporary leaders into dynastic rulers. Armies required taxes to fund them, leading to more sophisticated record-keeping. The very first payroll records, clay tablets from detailing barley rations for soldiers. But was coercion the engine of urban life? The evidence paints a nuanced picture. At Çatalhöyük, no signs of warfare appear for centuries, suggesting some cities grew through cooperation rather than conquest. Yet even peaceful centers like Mohenjo-Daro eventually built defensive walls as neighbors grew aggressive. The chilling account of the destruction of Ebla, where invaders specifically targeted administrative archives, reveals how early urbanites understood that erasing a city's memory could be as devastating as burning its buildings. Conflict became a paradox. It threatened cities while forcing them to develop the very systems, laws, organized labor, shared infrastructure that made them resilient. This tension between collaboration and control birthed humanity's next great invention, writing. Those first cuneiform marks pressed into clay weren't poetry or history, they were beer rations and tax receipts. In Uruk's temple storerooms, scribes used pictographs to track 6,000 different commodities, creating a system so precise it could distinguish between sheep intended for sacrifice and those bred for wool. When disputes arose over missing shipments, these records became evidence, transforming abstract promises into enforceable contracts. The leap from tally marks to true writing occurred when scribes realized symbols could represent not just objects but sounds, allowing names and narratives to be preserved. Consider the case of a Sumerian merchant named Shara, whose clay tablet complaint about receiving substandard copper from Dilmun is considered history's oldest known customer service dispute. His carefully inscribed words traveled across the Persian Gulf to demand restitution, an early example of writing's power to bridge distances and enforce accountability. Meanwhile, in Egypt, hieroglyphs emerged almost simultaneously but followed a different path, adorning tomb walls with spells to navigate the afterlife. Whether used for mundane inventories or sacred incantations, writing became the ultimate urban tool, allowing cities to scale beyond the limitations of human memory. The story of these early scripts reveals a profound truth about urbanization. Complexity demanded new ways to think. Tokens and tally sticks worked for village economies, but cities required systems capable of tracking debts across generations, codifying laws for thousands, and preserving knowledge beyond individual lifespans. When the kings of Akkad commissioned victory inscriptions in both Sumerian and their own language, they weren't just boasting, they were engaging in early propaganda, shaping how future generations would remember their reign. Writing didn't just record urban life, it became the loom on which the fabric of civilization was woven, thread by thread, into something far greater than its parts. Yet for all its power, writing also exposed urbanization's contradictions. The same tablets that documented fair wages also listed slaves captured in battle. Laws carved on stone pillars promised justice while entrenching social hierarchies. As we trace the evolution of these early cities, we're left with a haunting question. Did writing emerge to manage complexity or to consolidate control? The answer, like so much about our urban origins, lies not in absolutes but in the messy, brilliant, and often contradictory ways humans learned to live together. One scorching afternoon in ancient Uruk, a scribe pressed his stylus into wet clay, recording a shipment of barley, 37 jars for the temple workers. That mundane act, repeated thousands of times across Mesopotamia, changed humanity forever. These cuneiform tablets weren't just receipts, they were the scaffolding that held cities together. Imagine trying to feed 5,000 people without written records, or resolve a property dispute when no one remembers who owned a field 3 generations back. Writing solved problems that didn't exist in villages where everyone knew each other's business. In cities where strangers mingled daily, trust needed to be etched in something more permanent than memory. The world's first accountants were temple scribes, tracking everything from sheep sacrifices to the wages of construction crews. Their tablets reveal astonishing detail. One records a worker paid 3 liters of beer per day, the Bronze Age equivalent of a paycheck. Another lists a widow's lawsuit over stolen land. But bureaucracy wasn't writing's only gift. At some point, an imaginative scribe realized those same wedge-shaped marks could capture not just quantities, but the epic of Gilgamesh, making heroes and gods immortal in ways stone statues never could. This leap from inventory lists to literature marked a turning point. Now knowledge could accumulate beyond any single lifetime, accelerating innovation in ways oral cultures couldn't match. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, traders used carved seals pressed into clay to mark goods' early barcodes that may have guaranteed quality or denoted ownership. Though we can't yet read their script, the sheer number of these seals suggests a society where commerce depended on written authentication. Contrast this with Egypt, where hieroglyphs adorned temple walls and coffin texts, blending administrative and sacred functions. The difference speaks volumes. Mesopotamians wrote to govern, Indus traders wrote to do business, and Egyptians wrote to conquer death itself. Consider the ripple effects. Legal codes like Hammurabi's carved in stone for all to see created consistency across sprawling urban populations. Recipes for bronze alloying could now be preserved, leading to better tools. Medical texts standardized treatments, though some cures like rubbing a wound with mashed lizard make us grateful for modern medicine. Most profoundly, writing enabled cities to scale. What worked for governing 5,000 could, with adjustments, manage 50,000. The administrative tricks pioneered in Ur's ziggurat offices became the DNA of every subsequent empire. Yet this transformation came at a cost. Early scribes were elites, their skills gate-kept by powerful institutions. Some tablets mock the ignorant man who can't read, hinting at emerging class divides. Women appear rarely in early records, though exceptions like the high priestess in Hedwana history's first named author remind us that voices were excluded from these new systems of power. Writing could liberate knowledge, but it could also centralize control in ways oral societies resisted. Perhaps the most telling artifact isn't a tablet but a schoolboy's practice piece from Nippur, covered in his teacher's corrections. Even 4,000 years ago, education was the key to urban opportunity. Those who mastered writing didn't just record reality, they shaped it, drafting laws, composing hymns, and sometimes, like the scribe who cheekily wrote, "The reed is patient," on a dull assignment, revealing that humor transcends millennia. Their legacy isn't just words in clay, but the very idea that human thought could be captured, shared, and built upon. An innovation as foundational to cities as brickmaking or paved streets. Now, let's step beyond the scribble offices into the vibrant chaos of urban daily life, where bakers, potters, and dancers navigated a world being reinvented one written record at a time. Dawn in Ur begins with the scent of baking bread drifting through narrow alleys. Families rise in homes no larger than modern garages, their walls made of mud brick so thick it keeps interiors cool despite the blazing sun outside. Step inside one of these dwellings and you'll find a surprising sophistication: plastered floors, niches for oil lamps, and even terraces where residents sleep under the stars during summer nights. The heart of the home is the courtyard, where women grind barley into flour using stone querns, their rhythmic motions unchanged for generations. Nearby, clay pots simmer with lentil stew flavored with garlic and cumin, while children chase each other around the central hearth, their laughter bouncing off the high walls. Yet this intimate domesticity exists just steps away from the city's bustling arteries. Outside, the morning market erupts with activity. A weaver haggles over wool prices, a metalsmith displays bronze tools, and a fishmonger arranges his catch from the nearby Euphrates. The air hums with a dozen languages as traders from distant lands mingle with locals. For all its congestion, the city offers something villages rarely could: variety. A farmer's daughter might glimpse exotic spices from Meluha, hear lyre music played in a new style, or taste dates from a palm grove 50 miles upstream. This sensory richness came at a cost. Garbage piled in alleys attracted rats, and the close quarters meant a cough in one house could become a neighborhood epidemic within days. The contrast between communal luxury and shared hardship defined urban existence. At Mohenjo-Daro, residents enjoyed advanced amenities like brick-lined drains and neighborhood wells, yet their meticulously planned streets couldn't prevent the flooding that periodically swamped lower districts. In Mesopotamia, rooftop terraces provided precious extra living space but turned lethal during sudden storms when poorly baked bricks dissolved like sugar in the rain. Fire posed an even greater terror. A single overturned oil lamp could reduce entire blocks to ashes, as evidenced by layers of charred rubble in ancient excavation sites. Gender roles in these early cities present a fascinating puzzle. Cuneiform tablets from Sippar reveal women owning businesses and property, while cylinder seals show priestesses overseeing temple ceremonies. Yet other records depict strict divisions, men dominating metal workshops, women controlling textile production. The truth likely varied by city and class. An elite Akkadian woman might learn cuneiform to manage her husband's estates, while her poorer counterpart sold bread in the market. Indus Valley artifacts suggest even more fluidity. Figurines depict women as dancers and goddesses, while the absence of weapons in graves hints at societies where martial prowess mattered less than in Mesopotamia. Children's lives bridged these worlds. Archaeologists find their traces everywhere: tiny fingerprints pressed into clay toys, miniature vessels for pretend feasts, even scribbles on school tablets where young students practiced cuneiform between lessons. A particularly touching artifact from Nippur shows a child's writing exercise interrupted by a doodled horse, proving some distractions are timeless. Yet urban childhood wasn't all play. Teens apprenticed in workshops or learned sacred hymns, their labor essential to households where every hand contributed. What's striking is how these city dwellers balanced innovation with tradition. A Sumerian housewife might use the same clay spindle walls as her Neolithic ancestors while shopping in a market stocked with goods from half a continent away. Families honored age-old burial rites even as they adopted new fashions in pottery or jewelry. This tension between roots and progress resonates deeply today. Anyone who's video called grandparents while riding a subway understands that same duality. The true measure of these cities' success lies not in their grandest monuments but in the choices of ordinary people. Why endure the noise, the smells, the diseases? Because for all its challenges, urban life offered something irresistible: possibility. A chance to master a craft beyond farming, to hear stories from travelers who'd seen distant mountains, to be part of something larger than a single clan. When famine struck the countryside, city granaries might mean survival. When invaders came, towering walls offered protection. And when night fell, the glow of 1,000 oil lamps against mud brick homes proclaimed a revolutionary idea that together people could create light against the darkness. Beneath the surface of daily routines simmered social transformations that would ripple through millennia. As we peel back these layers, we uncover not just how ancient urbanites lived, but how they redefined what it means to be human, setting patterns of work, family, and community that still shape our lives today. Women's fingerprints are everywhere in ancient cities. If you know where to look, take the case of Enheduanna, the Akkadian high priestess who composed hymns so powerful they were copied for centuries. Her words, etched in cuneiform, weren't just prayers, they were political tools, uniting conquered Sumerian cities under the moon god Nanna's cult. But she wasn't an exception. Temple archives from reveal female administrators overseeing vast textile workshops where hundreds of women spun wool into trade goods. These weren't menial laborers, they were economic powerhouses. their output so vital it was recorded with the same precision as grain stores. Yet the same tablets that document their work also hint at constraints. A law code from Eshnana fines a man 20 silver shekels for striking another man's daughter, but only 5 if the victim was a slave woman. Hammurabi's famous laws, while offering women protections in marriage and business, punished adultery with drowning. The paradox is striking. Urban life gave women unprecedented opportunities to own property, run businesses, and even serve as priestesses, yet simultaneously codified their second-class status. Archaeology offers glimpses of resistance. In the Indus Valley, terracotta figurines depict women with elaborate headdresses and confident stances, perhaps goddesses, perhaps powerful individuals. At Çatalhöyük, burials show no gender disparity in grave goods, suggesting a society where women's labor was equally valued. Even in patriarchal Mesopotamia, clever loopholes emerged. A tablet from Sippar details how a widow named Nuasin used her dead husband's seal to secure a loan, demonstrating how women navigated legal systems designed to exclude them. The tension between opportunity and limitation played out in daily life. A woman grinding grain in her courtyard might also sell surplus bread at market, earning income that gave her leverage at home. Temple priestesses like Enheduanna wielded influence comparable to governors, yet couldn't pass their status to daughters. The very density of cities created contradictions. Crowded neighborhoods fostered gossip that policed women's behavior, while bustling markets offered anonymity for those who defied norms. Climate shifts would reshape these fragile balances dramatically. When drought struck Mesopotamia around 2200 BCE, temple records show women bearing the brunt. Ration lists shrink first for female workers. Yet in the Indus Valley, where city layouts suggest communal decision-making, climate stress may have temporarily leveled hierarchies, with all hands needed to dig new wells as rivers dried up. The lesson: women's urban experiences weren't monolithic but as varied as the cities themselves, shaped by environmental pressures as much as cultural norms. Now imagine the winds changing literally. As monsoon patterns shifted and river courses wandered, the very landscapes that nurtured early cities began turning against them. The next chapter of urbanization wouldn't be written by architects or kings, but by the relentless forces of nature. The air over Akkad grew thick with dust as the rains failed year after year. Crops withered in fields where irrigation canals ran dry, and the once mighty empire began cracking under the strain. This wasn't just a bad season, it was the 4.2 kiloyear event, a megadrought so severe it left its mark in ice cores and sediment layers across the globe. The Akkadian Empire, which had united Mesopotamia's city-states through conquest and clever administration, found no military solution to empty granaries. Tablets from this period tell desperate stories: workers abandoning construction projects, prices for grain skyrocketing 50-fold, and finally, the chilling line: the great cities were set aflame. Within decades, urban life in northern Mesopotamia nearly vanished, with survivors scattering into nomadic tribes. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles to the east, the Indus Valley faced its own reckoning. Mohenjo-Daro's meticulously planned streets began filling with silt as the Gagahakra River system dried up. Archaeologists find evidence of hurried repairs to wells and drains, then layers of mud as buildings were abandoned. Unlike Akkad's violent collapse, the Indus cities seem to have faded gradually, their trade networks shrinking, their standardized weights and measures giving way to regional variations. Yet here's the twist: while the great cities fell, smaller settlements persisted, adapting to the new climate reality by shifting crops and embracing pastoralism. Egypt's experience reveals another path. When drought parched the Levant, Nile floods remained relatively stable, fed by distant monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands. The difference was stark. Where Mesopotamian rulers faced revolts over food shortages, Egyptian pharaohs used surplus grain to consolidate power, building ever grander monuments. But even the Nile wasn't infallible. Records from the first intermediate period describe famines so severe that men ate their children, likely caused by unusually low floods. The lesson: no urban civilization, no matter how advanced, was immune to nature's whims. Human actions often amplified these crises. In Mesopotamia, centuries of irrigation had slowly poisoned the soil with salt, reducing wheat yields by half. Deforestation for construction and fuel made floods more destructive. The very technologies that enabled cities to flourish, canals, plows, axes, became tools of unintended environmental change. Yet amid these collapses, glimmers of resilience emerged. At Tel Leilan in northern Syria, archaeologists found evidence that survivors developed new drought-resistant crops like millet. In the Indus region, people shifted trade routes to harness surviving waterways. Perhaps most fascinating are the cities that reinvented themselves. Babylon rose from Akkad's ashes, its rulers learning from past mistakes by diversifying food sources and decentralizing storage. The Phoenician ports of Tyre and Sidon thrived after the Bronze Age collapse by pivoting from land-based empires to maritime trade networks. These urban phoenixes didn't just survive, they innovated, proving that collapse could be a crucible for reinvention. What does this mean for today's megacities? The parallels are sobering. Modern Phoenix and Cairo face water stresses eerily reminiscent of ancient Mesopotamia. But we also have advantages. Our ancestors lacked: global food systems, desalination tech, climate science. The real lesson from these ancient urban collapses isn't doom, but adaptability. Like the Indus people adjusting their crops or the Babylonians decentralizing grain stores, our best hope lies in anticipating change rather than resisting it. Now, let's journey beyond the textbook examples to uncover urban pioneers often overshadowed by Mesopotamia and Egypt, places where city life blossomed in surprising corners of the ancient world, proving urbanization wasn't just a river-valley phenomenon. High in the arid valleys of Peru, where the Andes meet the Pacific, a cluster of massive earth mounds rises from the desert, the work of the Caral Soup civilization. These pyramids predate the Inca by over 4,000 years, built around the same time as Egypt's earliest monuments. But here's what makes them extraordinary. Carol's people constructed these colossal structures without pottery, without metal tools, and most strikingly, without any evidence of warfare. No weapons, no fortifications, just intricate irrigation systems and plazas designed for communal gatherings. Their city thrived on trade, exchanging anchovies from the coast for cotton grown inland, all bound together by rituals that left behind haunting traces: flutes carved from condor bones, offerings of sacred plants, and circular sunken courts where hundreds may have gathered for ceremonies we can only imagine. Half a world away, along the winding Niger River, another urban experiment defied expectations. Geno, founded around 250 BC, flourished for over 1,000 years without kings, without palaces, without the trappings of hierarchy we associate with early cities. Instead, this African metropolis grew organically, a network of specialized neighborhoods where ironworkers, rice farmers, and potters coexisted in what archaeologists call a cluster city. No central authority forced cooperation here. Instead, mutual dependence and shared spiritual beliefs held the community together. Their terracotta sculptures, figures with bowed heads and serene expressions, hint at a society that valued collective harmony over individual dominance. These outliers shatter the old narrative that urbanization was a single invention that spread from Mesopotamia. Carroll's pyramid builders and Ingenious egalitarian traders prove that humans independently arrived at urban solutions as diverse as their environments. The Peruvian coast demanded water management. The Niger floodplain rewarded decentralized adaptation. Yet for decades, textbooks treated these civilizations as footnotes, if they mentioned them at all. The reason: archaeology's early biases, a field dominated by Eurocentric scholars who equated civilization with pyramids and palaces, writing off societies that didn't fit their narrow template. But the rituals of these forgotten cities reveal deeper truths about urbanization's purpose. At Carroll, the careful alignment of platforms with celestial events suggests a society that measured time not just for agriculture, but for communal celebration. In Ingenious, the placement of shrines at neighborhood crossroads implies spiritual practices that reinforced social bonds. These weren't failed attempts at Mesopotamian-style states. They were brilliant adaptations to local needs, proving that the essence of a city isn't control but connection. The next time you picture ancient urban life, don't just imagine ziggurats and crowded bazaars. Think of Carroll's musicians playing bone flutes under desert stars, or Ingenious artisans trading iron tools in a marketplace buzzing with a dozen languages. Their stories remind us that urbanization wasn't a single path, but many, each as valid, as innovative, and as human as the next. Rituals pulsed through the streets of ancient cities like a heartbeat, binding strangers together in shared rhythms. In Mesopotamia, the New Year festival wasn't just a celebration, it was a masterclass in urban cohesion. For 12 days, the statue of Marduk traveled through Babylon on a golden chariot, flanked by priests chanting hymns composed centuries earlier. Crowds lining the route weren't merely spectators, they became actors in a sacred drama reenacting the gods' victory over chaos. This wasn't entertainment, it was psychological infrastructure, transforming anonymous neighbors into comrades united against life's uncertainties. Now step into the cool silence of Mohenjo-Daro's Great Bath, where water still laps against brick walls 4,000 years after its construction. Unlike Mesopotamia's boisterous processions, Indus Valley rituals may have emphasized purification and quiet reflection. The bath's precise geometry, its stairs descending into crystal-clear water, its surrounding rooms possibly housing sacred oils, speaks of ceremonies meant to wash away more than dirt. In a city where thousands shared limited space, these rituals likely served as emotional pressure valves, offering moments of solitude amid the urban crush. Long before cities existed, humans were already experimenting with rituals that would later define urban life. At Göbekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers gathered around towering stone pillars 12,000 years ago not to trade goods but to feast. Archaeologists found thousands of animal bones from aurochs and gazelles, evidence of massive communal meals that may have bridged rival clans. These gatherings planted the seeds for something revolutionary, the idea that strangers could set aside differences for shared purpose. When permanent settlements emerged millennia later, that same principle would hold crowded cities together through harvest festivals, funeral processions, and temple ceremonies. The genius of these ancient rituals lies in their dual purpose. Sumerian beer festivals distributed surplus grain as divine gifts during lean years, masking welfare as worship. The Olmecs of Mesoamerica staged elaborate ball games where the losing team's sacrifice, sometimes literal, reinforced social hierarchies while entertaining the masses. Even seemingly mundane acts like the daily opening of city gates at dawn became rituals imbued with meaning, reinforcing order in environments where chaos always loomed. Modern urban planners are rediscovering these ancient wisdoms, Tokyo's cherry blossom viewings and New Orleans' second lines serve the same community-building functions as Babylonian processions. Food trucks clustering in empty lots echo Göbekli Tepe's feasts, creating spaces where strangers become temporary neighbors. The lesson: cities thrive not just on roads and buildings, but on shared experiences that turn them into us. Yet rituals alone couldn't sustain urban life without another crucial ingredient: food. The next chapter of our story begins not in grand temples, but in muddy fields where farmers unlocked the secret to feeding thousands, a revolution that would make every city from Ur to New York possible. The first cities didn't rise from empty stomachs, they were built on full granaries. Picture the Euphrates River Valley 4,000 years ago, where a single farmer's backbreaking labor could now feed 5 others thanks to domesticated wheat. This wasn't just a dietary upgrade, it was the spark that ignited urban life. With surplus grain stored in temple warehouses, people could suddenly specialize: potter, soldier, scribe, each relying on the farmer's excess to survive. But this agricultural revolution came with hidden costs. The same plows that broke fertile Mesopotamian soil also broke human spines. Skeletons from early cities show herniated vertebrae and arthritic joints from endless field labor, while dental records reveal cavities, a luxury hunter-gatherers rarely faced, their diets free from grain's sticky sugars. The tools that made surplus possible were engineering marvels. Egypt's shaduf, a counterweighted irrigation device, could lift 20 liters of water per minute from the Nile, equivalent to a modern garden hose's flow. Sumerian farmers harnessed oxen to pull seed drills, planting rows with precision that doubled yields. Yet these innovations exacted a toll beyond aching bones. Irrigation canals slowly poisoned fields with salt, turning breadbaskets into barren stretches within generations. At Tel Leilan in Syria, archaeologists found soil so saline it crusted like snow, a grim warning etched in the earth. This agricultural pivot reshaped more than landscapes, it rewrote social contracts. Where hunter-gatherers shared meat communally, grain surpluses became concentrated power. Temple seals from Uruk show priests distributing barley rations like paychecks, creating the world's first bureaucracy. The cuneiform symbol for female slave evolved from an image of a millstone, a chilling testament to who bore the grind of urban food production. Yet for all its inequalities, this system birthed unexpected freedoms. A woman weaving textiles in Ur could trade her cloth for fish without ever touching a plow, while her counterpart in a village spent dawn to dusk harvesting. Health tells the most paradoxical story. Urban skeletons average 5 inches shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors, victims of grain-heavy diets lacking wild game's nutrients. Mass graves reveal waves of tuberculosis and leprosy diseases that flourished in crowded streets, but these same cities also birthed the first healers. A Babylonian medical text lists 200 herbal remedies, while Egyptian doctors sutured wounds with linen thread. The trade-off was cruel but clear: shorter lifespans for some, unprecedented survival for others. A child who'd have died from an infected tooth in a nomadic band now lived thanks to a city-dwelling dentist wielding a bronze drill. Perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how this shift changed humanity's worldview. Farmers didn't just tame wheat, they internalized its rhythms. Where hunters followed migrating herds, planters tied their fate to parcels of land, measuring time by seasons instead of animal movements. This mental shift birthed calendars, property laws, and eventually the very concept of progress. The ziggurat wasn't just taller than a grass hut, it embodied a new belief that humanity could and should reshape nature to its will. Yet traces of the old ways lingered. In Mesopotamian myths, the wild demon Humbaba guards the cedar forests, a reminder of what was lost. Indus Valley seals depict unicorns, not the European fantasy, but likely memories of elusive aurochs fleeing cultivation's advance. These weren't just stories, they were collective mourning for a world where humans were one thread in nature's web, not its self-appointed weavers. The fields that fed cities also fed a new anxiety, that civilization's gains might come at a price even grain silos couldn't repay. Bones don't lie. The skeletons of early city dwellers tell a sobering story of humanity's urban transition. Archaeologists measuring remains from ancient Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley noticed something startling. The average urbanite stood 3 to 5 inches shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their teeth showed telltale cavities and abscesses from grain-heavy diets, while vertebrae bore the marks of relentless agricultural labor. Yet these same bones reveal fewer traumatic fractures than those of nomadic peoples, no more falls from cliffs during hunts or violent encounters with wild animals. The trade-offs were complex. Urban life traded acute dangers for chronic stresses, exchanging the hunter's broken ribs for the farmer's arthritic knees. Medical knowledge blossomed alongside these new ailments. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to 1600 BC but likely copying texts centuries older, reads like a modern trauma manual describing 48 cases from head wounds to spinal injuries with remarkable anatomical precision. Egyptian physicians prescribed honey for infections now known to have antibacterial properties and used linen sutures for closing wounds. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets list symptoms alongside treatments. If a man's temples hold pain, boil juniper in beer and let him drink. These weren't just folk remedies but systematized knowledge, passed down through generations of urban healers who saw enough patients to recognize patterns. The epidemiological shift was equally dramatic. Dense settlements became breeding grounds for diseases never before seen in small nomadic bands: leprosy, tuberculosis, and what scholars now identify as early strains of plague. Analysis of mass graves at Harappa shows clusters of skeletons bearing lesions consistent with malaria, while sewage channels at Mohenjo-Daro contained parasite eggs that still cause dysentery today. Yet this same concentration of people allowed for specialized healers. The world's first dentists drilled teeth in the Indus Valley, and Sumerian texts mention women skilled in midwifery who reduced childbirth mortality rates. Perhaps the most surprising revelation comes from comparing urban and rural remains at sites like Tel Brak in Syria. While city dwellers suffered more infectious diseases, their country cousins showed higher rates of violent trauma and nutritional stress during droughts. The urban safety net, temple grain stores, communal wells, and walls against raiders created buffers against catastrophe, even as it introduced new health challenges. This paradox mirrors modern debates about city living. Is breathing polluted air worth access to hospitals? Does workplace stress outweigh the security of steady wages? The true measure of urbanization's health impact may lie not in bones but in population numbers. Despite shorter lifespans, cities grew exponentially because they could sustain higher birth rates. Sedentary women could wean children earlier onto grain porridge than nomadic mothers reliant on breast milk alone. Infant mortality remained brutal by modern standards, but the sheer volume of urban births ensured survival of the statistical majority. This demographic revolution reshaped human existence more profoundly than any single disease or dietary change. Medical innovations born in these early cities still echo today. The concept of quarantine first appeared in Mesopotamian texts instructing towns to isolate plague victims. Egyptian eye makeup containing lead salts may have unintentionally prevented infections in dusty urban environments. Even the layout of streets mattered. Mohenjo-Daro's grid design allowed sunlight to penetrate alleys, naturally disinfecting surfaces. These weren't just reactions to illness but proactive adaptations to crowded living, proving that urbanization's health legacy is as much about solutions as it is about problems. As we turn from the ailments of early urban life to its triumphs, consider this: the same density that bred disease also accelerated invention. When dozens of artisans live within shouting distance, ideas cross-pollinate faster than germs. A potter's kiln inspires a metalsmith's furnace. A scribe's tally system becomes a merchant's contract. From this ferment of minds in close quarters would spring innovations that change the world: writing, the wheel, mass production, each born not in isolation, but from the beautiful, chaotic collision of urban lives. The streets of ancient Ur buzzed with more than just merchants and laborers. They crackled with the energy of discovery. Here, around 3500 BCE, someone rolled the first wooden wheel, transforming slabs of stone into smooth, gliding transport. What made this breakthrough possible wasn't just individual genius, but the city itself, a dense hive where potters spinning clay could inspire cartwrights to reimagine movement. Specialization became the engine of innovation. The same hands that shaped votive figurines in temple workshops later experimented with copper alloys, realizing that hotter kilns could unlock molten metal. Accounting tokens used to track sheep evolved into cuneiform numerals, giving birth to mathematics as priests calculated interest on grain loans. Cities didn't just gather people, they compressed knowledge, creating what theorists call the adjacent possible, where each new idea bumped against others, sparking unforeseen combinations. Yet not all innovations traveled equally. Walk through Mohenjo-Daro's ruins, and you'll find bricks so uniformly sized that they fit together like puzzle pieces across the entire Indus Valley, a testament to shared standards that functioned like ancient open-source code. Meanwhile, Egyptian artisans guarded glassmaking techniques as state secrets, their blue faience beads prized across the Mediterranean. This tension between collaboration and control shaped the pace of progress. Mesopotamian scribes freely adapted cuneiform across languages, while the Olmecs of Mesoamerica kept their rubber processing knowledge tightly held, creating bouncing balls that amazed neighbors but never spread. The most profound innovation, however, might be invisible: the very measurement of time itself. Villages followed the sun and seasons, but cities demanded precision. At Ur's ziggurat, priests tracked lunar cycles to schedule festivals, dividing nights into 12 double hours marked by water clocks. In China's Anyang, oracle bones recorded eclipses decades in advance, proving bureaucracies could predict celestial events better than any farmer's almanac. Timekeeping became a tool of power when Babylonian kings standardized calendars. They didn't just organize harvests, they synchronized labor for monumental projects, turning cosmic rhythms into economic engines. What's striking is how these breakthroughs emerged from necessity's grip. The first weight standards appeared when traders needed to trust strangers' measures. Geometry flourished as surveyors reallocated flood-disrupted fields. Even something as mundane as sewer design in Mohenjo-Daro, where engineers calculated slopes to the millimeter, showcases how urban density turned problems into laboratories. The same crowded conditions that bred disease also bred solutions, as healers compiled the first medical texts from countless observations. This dance between crisis and creativity reveals cities' true role. They weren't just containers for ideas, but accelerators that bent the arc of progress. A potter in a village might perfect her craft over a lifetime, but in Ur's bustling districts, she'd see 100 techniques by noon, borrowing glazes from one neighbor and kiln designs from another. The story of urban innovation isn't about lone inventors, it's about how humanity, packed together in stone and mud, became greater than the sum of its parts. Dawn breaks over Babylon, and the shadow of a towering obelisk creeps across stone markers embedded in the plaza. This isn't just a sundial, it's the world's first time clock, dividing daylight into 12 equal parts regardless of the season's shifting light. Nearby, temple scribes note the position of Venus, knowing its cycles dictate when to plant barley and when to collect taxes. Urban life didn't just invent calendars and clocks, it demanded them. When thousands depend on synchronized harvests, shared market hours, and coordinated labor for monumental projects, guessing the time by the sun's height won't suffice. The Nile's annual flood taught Egyptians an even more precise rhythm. Priests at Heliopolis tracked the star Sirius, whose first morning appearance before sunrise marked the new year and predicted the flood's arrival. Their calendar, 365 days divided into 12 months, was so accurate it drifted just one day every 4 years, a feat unmatched until Julius Caesar reformed the Roman calendar millennia later. But this wasn't just about agriculture. Pharaohs used these celestial alignments to stage coronations at the exact moment the sun illuminated inner temple sanctuaries, turning astronomy into political theater. Control time and you control the narrative of power. In the Indus Valley, a different system emerged. Excavations at Dolavira reveal a massive stone structure with 10 symmetrically arranged windows, possibly a solar observatory tracking equinoxes and solstices. Unlike Mesopotamia's lunar focus or Egypt's stellar precision, these urban planners may have prioritized seasonal markers to coordinate trade caravans before monsoon rains made travel impossible. Their calendar wasn't etched in clay or stone but woven into the city's very architecture, with streets aligned to celestial events. The regimentation of time reshaped human cognition itself. Farmers once measured days by animal migrations or fruit ripening. City dwellers now lived by the water clock's drip or the night watchman's call. This mental shift birthed abstract concepts like shift work and interest accrual. A Babylonian loan tablet specifies repayment when the moon of Adar wanes, while temple records detail beer rations for workers based on hours labored. Time became currency, something to be spent, saved, or stolen. Yet these systems weren't coldly mechanical. The Mayans of Tikal intertwined timekeeping with mythology, their long count calendar cycling through eras like cosmic seasons. The Athenian Metonic cycle reconciled lunar and solar years to schedule festivals honoring Athena, ensuring civic unity. Even practical Romans named hours after planetary gods, turning daily routines into celestial homage. Urban time wasn't just measured, it was storied, layered with meaning that transformed minutes into myth. As cities mastered the clock, they unlocked new artistic possibilities. The same priests who tracked stars for harvests noticed their patterns inspired awe. And what is art if not the shaping of awe into form? From this intersection of precision and wonder, humanity's next great urban legacy would emerge. The Yurok vase stands silent in a museum case today, but 4,000 years ago, its carved limestone surface told a story meant to echo through the ages. Circling the vessel in tiered registers, the imagery unfolds like a comic strip: naked priests carrying baskets of offerings, rams marching toward a goddess, and a ruler receiving her blessings. This wasn't just decoration, it was a masterclass in political theater, declaring that the king's authority flowed directly from the divine. Yet just a few vitrines away, the Indus Valley's famous dancing girl bronze offers a counterpoint. Barely 4 inches tall, her confident stride and tilted chin capture a moment of individual artistry frozen in metal, her bangles still seeming to jingle with movement. 2 artifacts, 2 civilizations, 2 entirely different visions of what art should do, one reinforcing hierarchy, the other celebrating human vitality. Urban art's power lay in its permanence. Where Paleolithic cave paintings remained hidden in deep caverns, Mesopotamian cylinder seals rolled their imagery onto countless clay tablets, stamping administrative documents with scenes of gods and heroes. These tiny engraved stones functioned like bureaucratic signatures, but also as propaganda, each impression reinforcing the social order. Similarly, Çatalhöyük's vibrant frescoes weren't tucked away in private homes but displayed on communal walls, their leopards and vultures watching over entire neighborhoods. The shift from portable art to fixed monuments marked more than an aesthetic choice. It signaled a society investing in the idea of endurance, declaring, "We are here to stay," in pigment and stone. Yet interpreting these symbols demands caution. For decades, archaeologists assumed every female figurine represented a fertility goddess until someone noticed that many were likely toys or even ritual puppets. The so-called priest-king statue from Mohenjo-Daro, once hailed as proof of Indus theocracy, might just depict a fashionable elite. Our modern lenses often distort ancient intent. Where we see quaint mythology, they may have seen practical diagrams. The Minoan bull-leaping fresco at Knossos, for example, could memorialize an actual sport, a religious rite, or pure artistic fantasy. We pass their worldview through fragments, like reconstructing a novel from scattered paragraphs. The biases run deeper than misinterpretation. Early excavators prized grand temples over domestic artifacts, prioritizing kings over potters. Thousands of broken loom weights and cooking pots were discarded as debris, erasing women's daily lives from the record. Even the artifacts we do have tell slanted stories. Clay tablets survive where parchment rotted, metal objects endure where wood decayed. The dancing girl's bronze survived by chance. Her cloth-wearing contemporaries vanished without a trace. Archaeology's narrative tilts toward what endured, not necessarily what mattered most to those who lived it. Perhaps the most revealing artifacts are the humblest. A child's footprint preserved in a wet brick at Mohenjo-Daro speaks louder than any royal inscription about who really built these cities. A Babylonian tablet complaining about low-quality copper deliveries shows urbanization's gritty reality beneath the monumental facade. These everyday remnants, a worn-out sandal, a scribe's doodle, a tavern keeper's accounts remind us that ancient cities weren't just stages for gods and kings, but living spaces where people laughed, bartered, and grumbled about their landlords. The true challenge isn't just uncovering their art, but listening past our assumptions to hear the full, messy chorus of urban life. Now, as we sift through these layered meanings, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. The voices easiest to hear are those already in power. The next chapter of our journey requires stepping off the pedestals and into the shadows, where archaeology's blind spots hide as many stories as its spotlights reveal. For generations, the story of urbanization wore a distinctly European face. Early archaeologists, armed with shovels and colonial biases, marched across the globe seeking firsts that would confirm their worldview: Mesopotamia's ziggurats, Egypt's pyramids, Rome's aqueducts. Meanwhile, Great Zimbabwe's towering stone walls in southern Africa were dismissed as the work of Phoenicians or biblical figures, its African builders erased from history. Teotihuacan's vast Mexican pyramids, aligned with celestial precision, were labeled mysterious rather than recognized as the product of sophisticated urban planning. These weren't just oversights, they were intellectual crimes, robbing entire civilizations of their place in humanity's shared story. The Amazon rainforest offers the most dramatic correction to these blinkered narratives. For centuries, European explorers described it as a pristine wilderness dotted with scattered tribes. Then LiDAR technology peeled back the canopy, revealing an astonishing truth. sprawling networks of causeways, plazas, and even pyramids, evidence of urban centers that may have housed millions. The Kuhakugu complex alone spanned over 7,000 square miles, with roads connecting satellite villages to central hubs, complete with fish farms and orchards. These weren't primitive settlements but carefully engineered landscapes, challenging everything we thought we knew about tropical urbanism. Why do these corrections matter? Because every erased city skews our understanding of human potential. When scholars insisted the Maya couldn't have built their cities without Old World influence, they implied innovation flowed in one direction, from advanced Europe to backward elsewhere. But Cahokia's mounds in North America, contemporary with medieval Europe's rise, demonstrate parallel urban genius. Its central monk's mound covers 14 acres at the base, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza's footprint, and was aligned to solar events with precision that would make Stonehenge's builders nod in respect. The truth is, urbanization wasn't a single spark that spread. It was multiple flames igniting independently where conditions allowed. Modern archaeology's toolkit is rewriting these narratives molecule by molecule. Strontium isotope analysis tracks the childhood origins of skeletons in ancient cities, proving Teotihuacan drew immigrants from as far as Guatemala. Soil core studies reveal how Amazonian black earth zones, once dismissed as natural phenomena, were actually engineered soils enriched by centuries of human waste and charcoal, creating fertile islands in the rainforest. Even humble pollen grains testify to urban planning. Cores taken beneath Germany's medieval cities show how quickly imported crops like figs and grapes replaced local flora after Roman conquest. The most exciting question isn't just who built the first cities, but how many origin stories we've yet to uncover. Submerged settlements like India's Dwarka, hinted at in ancient texts and now being mapped by marine archaeologists, could push urban timelines back further. Satellite imagery suggests hundreds of undiscovered sites in the Arabian Peninsula's empty quarters, where ancient trade routes once thrived. Each potential discovery carries a revolutionary implication that urban life, humanity's most transformative invention, emerged not once or twice, but wherever creative minds met fertile land and pressing need. This intellectual revolution forces us to confront an even deeper mystery. Were cities inevitable, the natural outcome when humans mastered agriculture, or happy accidents born from unique circumstances? The answer may lie in the spaces between these newly recognized urban experiments, where the same brilliant idea kept being born, died, and was born again across continents and millennia. Was urban destiny written into our DNA, or did humanity stumble into cities by chance? The debate cuts to the core of what makes us human. Environmental determinists point to the Fertile Crescent's perfect storm, reliable rivers, domesticable plants, and predictable seasons, as an inevitable recipe for urbanization. Yet the Andes' Carol civilization thrived without staple crops, while the Mongols built history's largest land empire from horseback. Perhaps cities weren't predetermined, but became irresistible once their gears began turning. Like a stone rolling downhill, each innovation, irrigation, writing, specialized labor created momentum that made returning to simpler ways unthinkable. Archaeologists call this the ratchet effect. Once societies tasted urban efficiency, there was no going back. Consider the cost-benefit analysis our ancestors faced. A farmer in ancient Ur traded backbreaking labor and disease for the security of temple grain stores and the marvel of bronze tools. A craftsman in Mohenjo-Daro endured crowded quarters but gained access to markets where her pottery could feed a family without ever touching soil. These weren't just practical choices, they reshaped human psychology. The same mental flexibility that allowed us to adapt to savannas now bent toward mastering urban complexity, creating feedback loops where each generation became more invested in the system. Yet the outliers haunt this narrative. The Indus Valley's eventual decline shows urbanization isn't irreversible. The Norse Greenland colonies collapsed rather than adopt Inuit hunting techniques, proving cultural inertia can outweigh survival logic. Even today, digital nomads replicate pastoral mobility through technology, challenging the assumption that density equals progress. Perhaps the real story isn't cities' inevitability, but their fragility, how civilizations repeatedly reinvent this precarious experiment, learning just enough from past collapses to tempt fate again. Modern cities still dance to ancient rhythms. Subway maps mirror Indus Valley street grids, zoning laws echo Hammurabi's codes, and skyscraper foundations owe their stability to Mesopotamian brick-laying techniques. The true urban tipping point wasn't a moment in the past, but an ongoing conversation between constraint and creativity, one where we're still writing the next verse. As we stand on shoulders of the first city builders, their choices whisper through every traffic jam and farmer's market, asking not whether cities were meant to be, but what we'll make of them next. Ancient Rome's choked streets and Babylon's housing disputes prove one thing: urban growing pains are as old as cities themselves. 2,000 years ago, Pompeii's planners tackled gridlock by carving out pedestrian-only zones, forcing carts to unload goods at the city's edge before transferring them to donkey-drawn trolleys. Fast forward to today, and modern metropolises like Copenhagen and Barcelona are reviving the same principle, replacing traffic-clogged thoroughfares with walkable superblocks. The parallel isn't coincidence, it's a testament to the timeless truth that thriving cities harmonize structure with flexibility. Consider the Indus Valley's answer to flooding. While modern engineers pour concrete to constrain rivers, Mohenjo-Daro's builders worked with the water, elevating entire neighborhoods on mounds and designing streets to channel monsoon rains into reservoirs. This ancient approach mirrors today's sponge city designs in Shanghai and Singapore, where permeable pavements and green spaces absorb stormwater instead of fighting it. The lesson: resilience isn't about overpowering nature, but adapting to its rhythms, a philosophy etched into 4,000-year-old bricks. Babylon's housing market offers another unexpected mirror to modern crises. Cuneiform tablets detail rent strikes when landlords hiked prices during festivals, prompting Hammurabi to cap rents at 1 year's harvest value. Compare this to Vienna's social housing model, where 60% of residents live in municipally owned apartments with stabilized rents. Both systems recognize the same urban truth: stability requires balancing profit with people's basic needs, but perhaps the most urgent ancient wisdom lies in decentralization. When drought collapsed the Akkadian Empire, survivors thrived by scattering into smaller, adaptable towns, a strategy now echoed in proposals for distributed, 15-minute cities, where essentials sit within walking distance. Meanwhile, the Mayas networked city-states, linked by shared culture rather than centralized control, inspire modern disaster planners advocating for regional collaboration over monolithic megacity dependence. The genius of these ancient systems lies in their dual focus. They planned not just for growth, but for shrinkage, not just for plenty, but for scarcity. From the grain silos of that fed citizens during droughts to the modular neighborhoods of Teotihuacan that could expand or contract with migration waves, early urbanites understood that flexibility was the price of longevity. As rising seas and heat islands test today's concrete jungles, these time-tested blueprints remind us that the cities of tomorrow might look less like Blade Runner's towers and more like the adaptive, human-scale wisdom of our very first urban ancestors. From mud bricks to steel towers, the story of cities is ultimately a story about us, the choices we make when living elbow to elbow, and the impossible dreams we dare to build together. Those first urban planners didn't just stack stones, they stacked ideas, testing how strangers could become neighbors, how chaos could become order, and how survival could blossom into culture. The ziggurats of Ur, the grids of Mohenjo-Daro, the canals of Caral, these weren't just feats of engineering, but of imagination. Every sewer line laid and every law code etched was a bet that humanity thrives not in isolation, but in collision where differing skills and perspectives spark something greater than their parts. What's astonishing isn't just how much these ancient cities achieved, but how little they agreed on. The Indus Valley built equality into its very streets, while Mesopotamia crowned god-kings. The Minoans painted dolphins on their walls and danced with bulls, while Egypt measured eternity in perfectly aligned pyramids. There was no one right way to urbanize, just countless experiments in balancing freedom and structure, tradition and innovation. Their diversity is a gift to us, proving that cities aren't inevitabilities, but invitations to keep reinventing how we live together. Yet for all their differences, these early urbanites shared one unshakable belief, that the future belonged to those who dared to gather. When climate change dried rivers or invaders stormed gates, they didn't abandon the urban experiment, they adapted it. The same resilience echoes today in Venice's floating foundations and Singapore's vertical gardens, in Copenhagen's bicycle highways and Medellin's library parks. The challenges have changed, but the central question remains: how do we build places that don't just house bodies but nourish souls? So here's to the first city builders, the dreamers who looked at a floodplain and saw a forum, at a crossroads and saw a cosmos. They left us more than ruins, they left us a roadmap. Every time we plant a community garden where pavement once ruled, or turn an abandoned factory into artist lofts, we honor their legacy. The next great urban revolution won't come from any single genius, but from all of us, learning from the past while daring to reimagine what cities can be. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you could step into any ancient city at its peak, where would you go? Would you stroll Mohenjo-Daro's spotless streets, debate philosophy in Athens' Agora, or marvel at Tenochtitlan's floating gardens? Drop your pics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more adventures where history meets the modern world. The conversation about our urban future is just beginning, and your voice